He had long since stopped counting after the first 100, but the story said 900 fights, 900 victories, and not a single man had ever managed to bring him down. To the crowd that roared his name from smoky bars to cavernous arenas, he was less a fighter than a myth who walked with bloodied fists and an unshakable grin. They told tales of opponents staggering out of the ring before the second round, of veterans who swore they had never felt a strike so fast, so brutal, so final. He basked in that reputation, feeding on the gasps and cheers as though they were oxygen, and the arrogance that wrapped around him was no longer arrogance at all but a second skin. He carried himself like a man who believed the world itself bowed beneath the weight of his fists. Thick shoulders scarred from past wars flexed as he strode through corridors painted with posters of his victories. His jaw carried a permanent smirk, that irritating curve of a man who had never known failure, who mocked fate itself with every step. Even those who despised him admitted there was something magnetic about him, something that made people watch even if only to see if tonight might be the night his impossible streak ended. But always, without exception, it did not. The myth had been carefully built and carefully maintained. It wasn't only his skill but the theatrics that elevated him. He taunted opponents before the first bell, laughed at their preparations, and whispered promises of humiliation. He was a man who relished not only in winning but in reminding others they had no chance. The bookmakers hardly bothered adjusting odds anymore. Wagers weren't about whether he would win, but whether the fight would last more than a minute. Some said it was a joke, others said it was history in the making, but the result was the same. Arenas filled, pockets emptied, and his grin widened. Yet beneath the glow of flashing cameras and the chants that carried his name, there was something hollow, though no one dared to say it aloud. He crushed challengers without breaking a sweat, but victory after victory had dulled into routine. To him, opponents blurred into faceless shapes that folded under his fists. The audience saw dominance. He felt boredom disguised as triumph. When he spoke to reporters, promising quick and brutal endings, there was no thrill in his voice anymore, only habit. He bragged of his 900 wins not with awe but with the irritation of a man repeating the same story to people too slow to remember it. Still, the world adored him. For some, he was proof that strength could become legend. For others, he was a villain worth jeering at, an arrogant titan they longed to see fall. Rival gyms sent fighters in waves, men with reputations of their own, hoping to be the one to stop him. None had succeeded. The myth consumed them all. And so, when the announcement came that he would step into the ring again, the world responded with the same mixture of excitement and resignation. Excitement, because the spectacle was always dazzling. Resignation, because the result seemed inevitable. The posters promised his 901st conquest. Commentators rehearsed their dramatic lines about his dominance. The crowd poured in, expecting another swift knockout, another victim left sprawled before the referee could even raise a hand. Even he himself mocked the idea of resistance. When asked in an interview what this new challenger would bring, he chuckled, leaned into the microphone, and said, "Nothing. Nothing but a reminder that I can't be touched." This fight won't last long enough for the ref to finish saying begin. It was arrogance, yes, but it was also prophecy. At least, that's how it felt. His words had become tradition, each boast etched deeper into his legend. The promoters leaned on that arrogance, selling tickets on the back of his certainty. The crowd came not to see if he would win, but to measure how little time his opponent would last. Bets were laid in seconds, wagers shouted between drinks, every person convinced they were watching inevitability unfold yet again. And so the stage was set, the myth ready to grow larger still. He walked toward the lights with the weight of a man already victorious, waving at the chanting masses as though they were his subjects. His fists were wrapped, his muscles coiled, his grin fixed. There was no question in his mind, no shadow of doubt that tonight would be like every other night. Another opponent crumpled, another number added to his record, another cheer rising into the rafters. But somewhere, among the sea of faces, a whisper had begun to circulate, carried from lips to ears like a secret too dangerous to be spoken loudly. It was not about him, but about the one who would stand across from him. A name no one recognized, a face that did not belong to the pantheon of famous contenders. The crowd laughed when they heard it, disbelief shaking through their voices. A woman, they said. A woman had stepped forward to challenge the undefeated beast. It was a joke to them, a spectacle of mockery, a mismatch so absurd it drew even more attention. He smiled when he heard it, not with surprise but with delight. To him, this was not a threat but an insult, and insults made for the sweetest victories. He imagined her broken on the mat before she had even thrown a punch, the jeers of the audience becoming his thunderous applause. He boasted louder, sharper, promising that this time it would be even faster, even easier, that he would end it before the referee's word could carry into the crowd. It was not arrogance anymore, it was certainty carved into stone. And yet, in the moments before the fight, when the whispers spread and the name of his challenger echoed against the arena walls, something shifted. The laughter in the crowd did not erase the faint edge of curiosity. They wondered, briefly, why she had chosen this stage, why she had signed her name to face a man no one else had toppled. They wondered if she knew something they did not. He dismissed it all with a chuckle, but the whisper remained, growing louder with every passing second, waiting for the moment when the lights would dim, the announcer would call their names, and the truth of her purpose would be revealed. She arrived without fanfare, slipping into the building with the kind of composure that drew no attention at first. Where his presence had always been a storm of noise, hers was silence, steady, deliberate, unshaken. She didn't need the crowd's recognition or the flashing cameras to announce her. Her existence was not crafted for spectacle. The arena's energy shifted when eyes finally found her, not because of grandeur, but because of the sheer contradiction she represented. Against his towering bulk and the legend wrapped around him like armor, she seemed impossibly out of place. Yet, there was something in her stillness that unsettled those who looked too long. Her frame was not the exaggerated bulk of bodybuilders or the scarred mass of lifelong brawlers. Instead, every line of her physique spoke of precision and discipline, shoulders shaped by endless hours of training, a stance coiled with hidden readiness, and eyes that betrayed nothing. Those who mocked her presence for being too slight, too ordinary, quickly faltered under that gaze. It was the gaze of someone who had seen more than fists could deliver, of someone for whom violence was not theater but language. She did not walk like an intruder in his world, but as if she had always belonged, waiting for this exact moment. For her, the fight was not about spectacle. It was not about proving that women could stand against men, nor about humiliating the champion who had humiliated countless others. Her reasons ran deeper, buried under years of quiet battles no one had seen. She had learned to survive in back alleys and dimly lit gyms where failure was not measured by lost matches, but by whether one walked away at all. She had trained in silence, sparring with shadows, perfecting techniques with obsessive resolve. To her, the man with 900 victories was not a legend but an obstacle, one that had to be removed. The crowd, however, saw none of this. They saw only the mismatch. Laughter rippled through the stands when her name was announced. Bets swung wildly, odds climbing higher with every jeer. Even those who had long grown tired of his arrogance could not believe she would be the one to stop him. They saw her as a curiosity, a strange intermission in the saga of his victories, a reminder that sometimes fights were staged for entertainment rather than competition. Their voices carried mockery, but hidden among them was a quieter thread of intrigue. They had seen arrogance before. They had not seen someone stand across from him with such unnerving calm. At the weigh-in, he treated her presence as a comedy. His smirk stretched wider than usual, his taunt sharper, crafted not only to intimidate her, but to amuse the crowd. "This isn't a fight," he said, leaning close enough for the microphones to catch every word. "This is charity. I'll give you the shortest loss of your life." The room erupted in laughter, echoing his cruelty. She remained still, hands clasped loosely before her, eyes fixed on his as though measuring every word, every movement. She did not respond. Silence was her weapon, and though the crowd mistook it for weakness, it unsettled him in a way he could not articulate. Reporters pressed her for comments, eager to catch a tremble in her voice or a slip of nervousness, but she gave them little. When asked why she had chosen him, she answered only, "Because he is the one they all believe cannot be beaten." Her tone was even, stripped of anger or bravado, and that very simplicity lingered in the air long after the interview ended. No one knew her past, no one knew her style, and that mystery only deepened the unease around her presence. The day of the fight came swiftly, and with it the usual storm of noise. Lights flared, chants roared, and the air throbbed with anticipation. He made his entrance as he always did, arms raised, grin wide, his body painted with the glow of his legend. The crowd responded on cue, showering him with adoration and fear. He moved as though the fight were already over, basking in the certainty of victory. Then came her turn. No music blared, no spectacle unfolded. She stepped into the light quietly, eyes forward, ignoring the jeers. Her calm cut through the chaos like a blade, and though many mocked, a sliver of doubt crept into the room. When they finally stood across from each other, the contrast was startling. He bounced on his toes, energy spilling in waves, his smirk daring her to show fear. She did not move. Her body was still, her breathing measured, her focus absolute. He taunted her again, loud enough for the front rows to laugh along. She did not blink. In that silence, in that refusal to play his game, the central conflict crystallized. Arrogance against resolve, noise against quiet, spectacle against substance. The referee called them to the center. He swaggered, towering, practically vibrating with confidence. She stepped forward with the same quiet steps she had carried from the moment she entered the arena. For a fleeting instant, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. He believed her to be another number, another story to add to his legend. She believed him to be the barrier standing between her and the truth she carried inside. One of them would be proven right in moments. The referee's instructions blurred beneath the roar of the crowd. He grinned and stretched his neck, already imagining the end. She exhaled once, slow and steady, grounding herself in silence. The announcer's voice rose, the bell waited to ring, and the air thickened with the weight of expectation. He believed this was inevitable. She knew inevitability was a lie. As they returned to their corners, tension coiled tighter than ever. The audience leaned forward, some out of bloodlust, some out of mockery, a few out of growing curiosity. The myth of 900 wins stood on one side, swelling with certainty. The quiet challenger stood on the other, calm and unreadable. The central conflict had sharpened into a blade. Would arrogance continue to reign, or would silence cut through it? The answer waited only for the referee's hand to drop, and his voice to declare the word that would begin it all. The referee raised his arm between them, voice echoing above the noise, the single word forming on his lips. He was only halfway through when it happened. She moved with a speed that felt impossible, the kind of motion too fast for the eye to follow, yet too precise to be reckless. Before the crowd could process, before the syllables of "begin" had left the referee's mouth, her strike landed, sharp, controlled, final. His head snapped sideways, body lurching, and for the first time in 900 fights, the man who could not fall was sent crashing to the canvas. Silence swept across the arena like a storm cutting through fire. The cheers died in throats, the jeers froze, and the myth of invincibility shattered in the sound of his body colliding with the mat. He tried to rise, eyes wild with disbelief, but his legs betrayed him. He had built his life on arrogance, on the certainty of his power, and now that foundation crumbled beneath the weight of one strike delivered with perfect intention. His smirk was gone, replaced by shock, as if the world had played a cruel trick on him. The referee hesitated, momentarily forgetting his own duty. The count stumbled from his lips, awkward and halting, as if his mind refused to believe what his eyes had seen.
1, 2.
The crowd began to stir, disbelief breaking into chaos. Some screamed it had been a fluke, others roared with sudden exhilaration, but all of them leaned forward as though closeness would bring clarity. He pushed against the canvas, muscles straining, pride raging louder than pain, but his body no longer listened. Every attempt to rise was weaker than the last. She stood where she had struck, her breathing even, her eyes fixed on him not with triumph, but with quiet inevitability. She did not raise her arms, did not bask in the shock around her. For her, the fight had always been stripped of spectacle. Victory was not a performance, but a conclusion. The noise of the world did not matter. What mattered was the barrier had fallen. By the time the referee reached 7, it was already over. His arms trembled as he tried to push himself upright again, but his strength failed. He slumped back down, eyes clouded with the bitter realization that no amount of arrogance could change the truth. At 8, the crowd had begun to roar again, their disbelief transforming into something raw and electric. At 9, some screamed for him to rise, desperate to see their legend restored. At 10, the final syllable landed, and with it, so did his reign. The arena erupted into chaos. Some fans cheered wildly, exhilarated by the impossible. Others booed, unwilling to accept the collapse of their myth. Reporters scrambled for angles, cameras flashed like lightning, and voices clashed in a storm of disbelief. In the center of it all, she stood unmoved, the eye of the storm, expression calm and distant. She did not gloat, did not mock, did not even glance at the crowd. Her eyes were still on him, the fallen giant, as though silently acknowledging the weight of what had ended. He lay sprawled on the canvas, staring upward, chest heaving, his pride bleeding out with every breath. In his mind, fights had always been extensions of his will, inevitabilities that bent to his arrogance. But inevitability had betrayed him. The streak he boasted of had been snapped not by some rival forged in his image, but by the one challenger he had never imagined. The humiliation was sharper than pain, deeper than defeat. His legend was no longer unbroken. It was over. The referee lifted her hand, announcing her as the winner, but she barely reacted. To her, the gesture was unnecessary. She had not come for applause or recognition. She had come to prove a truth, that arrogance was not invincibility, that silence could cut louder than noise, that even the strongest myths fall. And she had done exactly that. The commentators scrambled for words, trying to capture the shock, but language stumbled in their mouths. They had built careers narrating his dominance, and now they faltered, confronted with an ending they had never rehearsed. The audience's roars thundered above them, the sound of a world rewriting itself in real time. Somewhere in that frenzy, new myths began to form. He rolled to his side, shame burning deeper than injury, eyes locking with hers one final time. In her gaze he found no mockery, no cruelty, only certainty. That calm silence that had unsettled him from the start now swallowed him whole. She had ended what he thought eternal, and in that unflinching truth, he saw himself not as a titan but as a man laid bare. She turned and walked away, not waiting for the chaos to settle, not needing to hear the echoes of her victory. The noise followed her, but she left it behind, her step steady, her purpose fulfilled. Behind her, the myth lay broken, the crowd split between mourning and awe. The world would talk of this night for years, retelling the story of the undefeated man brought down before the referee could even finish saying begin. And somewhere within that endless retelling, her silence would echo louder than any boast, ensuring that the legend of his fall would never be his alone.